Hey, Dara, how many years is NOIR lab is been?
NOIRLab?
Yeah.
Uh, since just before the pandemic, so
Oh, okay.
maybe 5, 6
Hmm,
years.
great. And it's all the ground telescopes I see.
That's right.
Very cool.
So that must have been an interesting startup.
It's interesting. I actually think it was better for us in some ways because everybody was on the same level. We have so many people spread across the world, but because of the pandemic, everybody was on the same footing, right? Everybody was on Zoom. So you couldn't feel like the people in Tucson or the people in Chile had more information than anybody else because everybody was online. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, we had the Shield phase one during the pandemic, and it was easier. There's stuff that it's just easier. You're on the same place at home, and it was they're much easier.
Hmm.
And yeah, starting with Zoom, that was, can you imagine without the Zoom before?
Right, right.
It would have been really tough. Yeah.
And it was
So,
interesting because we were used to doing things remotely because we already had places in Chile. We didn't have Zoom, but we had sort of other internal things. So,
yeah. But I
yeah,
think, normalizing that it's
yeah,
okay. We don't have to be in the office. We can do
right.
it, and let's collaborate via screen instead of we have to
Yeah.
be. Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, the pandemic brought other difficulties, but
Yes,
but I
yes, yes,
actually
yes.
think there were some things that were good.
Yeah, exactly. No, absolutely. Yeah. Perfect. Okay, great. So I'm Rav Ofer. I'm the director of Shield, and I will tell you in a minute more about Shield. But before that, I just want to present our wonderful speaker that we have today, Dara Norman. She's a deputy director of if I'm pronouncing it correctly, the NOIRLab, and I'm doing that French-wise, NOIRLab. NOIRLab, that is a community science and data center, and is deal with ground telescopes, and I'm sure she is going to tell us way more about it. She leads the center community science mission to support the user needs and the astronomical community in general. And I know she is very involved in advocating for broad and equitable data access. I am too, in terms of numerical models on my end. But also, she's very interested in the cultural workforce of astronomy. And she was involved in the Decadal Surveys with white papers. And now she is elected president of WS. So we have an immense pleasure and we are going to hear about your trajectory and challenges and so forth. And we'll have, as usual in Shield, a very informal conversation. Um, I don't have a coffee with me. I have like a soda. So it's usually just bring a drink, let's talk about challenges and see where we go from there. And we will open for the audience to ask questions as well. Let me share my screen and just um, to people that don't know what Shield is about, tell a little bit about it, and then I will let Dara um, tell us about her trajectory. So the Shield webinar is one of the arms of our broader impact strategy within the Shield Drive Center. I'm the director, and John Richardson out of MIT is being my sidekick for so many years. He's a project manager and of Shield. And Shield I will tell you in a minute, we're studying the bubble around our own sun, but just to put in a larger context, every single star I like to say stars are not naked, they're surrounded by a cloth that is generated by their own winds as they move around the galaxy, and we call them astrospheres. So for astronomers at large, we tend to not think about astrospheres but we think in the heliospheric community that this is a very important ingredient for how life emerged and around those stars and other consequences. So here are like 3 images of astrospheres. Those are real data. And SHIELD, if you want to know more about it, the Drive Center is one of the NASA large drive centers funded in the last decadal. And I'm going to play this movie. You can go to our website to know more about it. But the cloth that surround our own sun, the heliosphere, we think look like that. It's a realization to one of our models that you can see this bubble engulf the sun and all the planets. And so we dive into Earth, and we know that not just in Earth, but in other planets that where we are trying to find life, they are embedded within astrospheres. SHIELD stands for this long acronym that you can blame my students for coming up with that. Solar wind with hydrogen ion charge exchange and large-scale dynamic. And the vision that we had in setting this center was to create a digital twin, to try to ingest all what we know about the science, the modeling, the data into an understanding in a digital way to be able to be predictive of not just the heliosphere, but to any other astrosphere. It's a really large group of people and large institutions, not only in US, but around the world. And here are some of our partners. And here again is a mosaic showing the complexity of trying to understand the processes that govern the heliosphere. And I don't expect you guys to really go through all the details and try to make sense of it. It's just to impress upon you that there are many, many questions that we still don't know about the heliosphere, even we don't understand the shape of it. So one of our major questions is it really looking like that it's almost like a cold sun-like shape, or maybe it has a more extended tail, and what are the processes that govern that shape? And the wind of the sun at large distances is really different than the wind near the sun. So there are these other particles called pickup ions that come from the fact that we are in a partially ionized interstellar medium. So it's just to impress upon you that trying to understand a heliosphere and then understand other astrospheres is a big challenge, and it's extremely fascinating. And as I said at the beginning, not only we are doing the science, but we want within the science to have our early careers lead that science and have diverse voices within our team to analyze this data. So we don't want to do broader impacts on the side. We want to do it embedded within our science mission. So we have lots of stuff in order to do that. We do have an undergrad effort, our youth. We do have a summer school. We do have a safe space called Coffee Chats, and we do have these webinars. But we also have a program that we have a leadership role within the center where we advanced early careers into leading roles within the center. We also have this effort that we are going to revive it called You Can Be What You Can See. We have done it at the phase 1. We want to start again. And whoever is listening to it, you can be part of it. You don't have to be part of SHIELD. You can just be interested in having your voice in this mosaic of voices, of diverse voices in general in STEM. And so reach out to Sanlin, to Nick, to SHIELD Outreach, or to myself, and we can help you do that with us. It's just 5-minute snippets of testimonials. The upcoming events, we are having several seminars about mental health, and we had a panel last year, followed up by a panel by a workshop that Jessica Harris runs through our webinar. And now we're going to have another group session, closed up sessions with Jessica, Edward Gonzalez, and Sanlin, our directors our Director of Broader Impact. So those sessions will be, as shown here, November 21st and December 5th. And those are closed sessions, so safe space. So if you want to participate, please contact Sandlin and she will set it up for you. We also have the coffee chat, and the next one is December 6th. It's also open to anyone. It's not open to senior researchers because we're trying to keep it safe. But that's, again, the theme today of Coffee Chat. The next one will be managing your time at large in professional conferences like AGU. Next year, we're going to have a series of webinars that we are going to call the Voyager Story Corps, trying to tell stories and interviewing key people on Voyager that will talk about this incredible mission and all the memories that they have. So find us on the web. There is lots of places where you can find us, and be in contact with us. Thank you. So Dara, the floor is yours now.
Okay, let me share my screen and my camera. All right, and let me try and put this in the right mode. Oh, there we go. I can't reach it. There we go. So first of all, I want to thank the host for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here and excited to be giving this this talk that I've titled "Staring into Space: My Life as an Astronomer." I particularly like that title, and I've used it sort of in telling people what I do because I think I'm really privileged actually to be able to spend my time thinking about the universe and galaxies and all of this really interesting stuff. And really, at the end of the day, what I'm doing is I'm really staring into space and trying to make sense of our universe. And I'll get to the part about me being Deputy Director of the Community Science and Data Center at NOIRLab in Tucson, Arizona. And I recently became the President of the American Astronomical Society. And I'm going to start with my journey here. It was a lot of fun actually going back and trying to find some of these pictures that I hadn't looked at for a while or seen in a while. And so just to talk about my early years, both of my parents were actually in the Navy. This is my mom and my dad. And so I joke that, you know, if I use a few off-color words, that's because I am the daughter of two, not one, but two sailors. And so in my youth, we moved around a little bit. And though I was born in Tennessee, near Naval Base there, we moved to Maine pretty early in my youth. I don't actually remember anything in Tennessee. But the picture below here is actually a picture of where we lived in Maine when we first got there. That's me in the yellow jacket there with my mom and my sister, who is a couple of years younger than me. And, you know, one thing that I remember, or the things that I remember about Maine really vividly, are things like milkweeds, white birch trees, and a lot of people with red hair. But I also remember that we were often, almost always, the only Black family on the block. And my sister and I were the only Black kids in our kindergarten. And, you know, I think looking back on it, you know, as a kid, I certainly noticed, but it didn't seem like a big deal. But looking back, I think it really taught me how to be the outsider in a space. And I don't say that in a bad way. I actually think that there are some advantages to feeling like the outsider in some spaces that give you some insight into things. And I think I'll talk about that a little bit more in the talk. When I was about 7 years old, my parents split up and we moved back to the south side of Chicago where my mom and my dad had gone to high school. And so if I thought I was an outsider in New England, being, you know, one of the only Black people, I was definitely an outsider on the south side of Chicago with a very thick New England accent. And I don't have any recordings of myself, but my mom tells me that the teachers really said that they could not understand a word I was saying. And I was very jealous of my sister because she lost her accent pretty early on. She was much younger, and mine stuck around for a while. So, so that gave me a sense, again, of being an outsider. In Chicago, I went to a couple of Episcopal and Catholic schools because my mother was very interested in having us get a good education. And given the fact that we weren't particularly well off, Catholic and Episcopal schools in Chicago are, you know, kind of private schools that don't cost a lot of money. And so here's a picture of me actually in, I think, 3rd grade as the student of the month. And in September, and I'll tell you, I was often student of the month in September. And I remember one year where I was not student of the month in September, and I was really mad about it. I said, look, you always get it. We're going to let somebody else do it this year. So, but I was pretty good at school and pretty studious and enjoyed my time actually. But, you know, and it was actually in sort of around this time that I really got interested in being an astronaut. And part of that had to do with my mom being really interested in the space program, letting us stay home from school or be late to school when there were shuttle launches so we could watch them on TV. And so I was really interested in the space program and in being an astronaut. In 7th grade, I moved to a public school, and they had assigned me actually to a remedial math class. And I came back and told my mom how, you know, they were doing like long division in this class, and and people weren't even getting it. And she you know, pretty much you don't mess with my mom. She kind of marched in and was like, what have you done? What are you doing? And so immediately they took a look at my scores and moved me to over to take algebra at the high school, which was next door to our middle school. And so I ended up being a couple of years in high school ahead in math. The other nice thing about that move was that there were sort of 3 other people who also took math at the high school from the middle school. And, you know, a couple of them became like really lifelong friends that I'm still friends with today. And I had a small cohort that I could, because you can imagine a 7th grader, I guess it's less uncommon now, but as a 7th grader going over to the high school, everybody looked very big and imposing. So it was nice to have sort of our little cohort of a group that could go in and talk to the teacher and not feel so intimidated. The high school I went to Kenwood Academy in Chicago. It has Academy on it, but it's just a public high school. It was a very multicultural high school. A lot of folks whose parents were actually professors at the university went there, but also a lot of students just from the south side of Chicago, from the neighborhood. And so a real mix of people who went to the school and from a lot of different backgrounds. And I was on the swim team. So we had a really good swim team. I in particular was not an especially strong swimmer, as all right, but we had a really good team, and our team was often first in city. We'd go. Some of our folks would qualify for state, and they'd get crushed at state because Illinois is actually a really strong swimming university. But we did really well in city, and I'm here like right in the middle here, and we're wearing our championship T-shirts that we got for winning city that year, and I was also on the math team, and I don't know how many people have been on math team before, but primarily did the relay, and I actually really enjoyed doing the relay where you answer questions and you pass your answer back because the person behind you needs to use that answer actually in their problem. So I did a relay and 10-person team primarily. But these were really strong years for me. I really enjoyed high school, actually. And I'm one of the few people I know who actually enjoyed high school. But these years actually gave me a lot of confidence. And I think a lot of confidence because, I was on teams and I was thriving in the spaces where I was, both athletically and as academically. I stuck this image in here because I wanted to point out that growing up in Chicago, even my father asked me, how in the world did you get interested in astronomy? Because, from Chicago, you don't see a whole lot of the sky. So for anybody who's familiar, and I know we've seen a little too much of the map of the US, but here's a map of the US showing at night, showing all of the bright spots in the US. And Chicago's here. It's easy to pick out because it's on Lake Michigan, and it's just this like enormous bright spot. And anybody who's flown over Chicago at night knows that there's a lot of light coming off. And so you don't see a lot of the sky. I live now in Tucson over here, and you can see Tucson and Phoenix is over here, a much brighter space. And of course, most of our telescopes are out here in these darker areas. But growing up in Chicago, I didn't see a lot of the sky. And so what really got me interested was the opportunity for going to museums and science museums and the Adler Planetarium. So I'm showing here an image of the Museum of Science and Industry, which actually was very close to where I lived. And even when I lived a little bit farther inland from where I went to high school, it was really just a bus ride away. And so I really remember being, bored on a Saturday or on a weekday as a kid, sort of hanging out in the summers. And my mother would say, well, why don't you guys go to the museum? And it was really just a bus ticket away. So we could ride down to the bus ticket. And at the time, the Museum of Science and Industry was free. It's not free these days. And I understand how the business side has to keep up museums. And so you really need that revenue. But it was free to kids like me who could just go in, and maybe we didn't, intentionally go there to learn science, but it was a real opportunity to explore the exhibits and to sort of by osmosis even like become interested in some areas of science that we may not actually have had access to even at school, right? And I point out here the planetarium, the Adler Planetarium. It's the oldest planetarium in North America. And this arrow here is actually points to the apartment building where I grew up. So I really like this picture because it's a picture looking to the south of the museum, as opposed to a lot of pictures you see of Chicago are just the north side looking towards the downtown area. But this looks out south where I lived. And when I was young, the planetarium was just this sort of stone area. They've since built this whole other exhibition area, which is really nice. And in fact, my husband is also an astronomer, and we got married at the Adler Planetarium. Very nerdy thing to do, but it was a really great place because we knew there were going to be a lot of kids at our wedding. So for the next part of this, I really want to turn to sort of whipping through the rest of my career by pointing out some things I've learned about astronomy, astrophysics, and the culture that our community really has. And by culture, I mean our values, the things that we think are important and the things that we think are less important a lot of the times, our norms, how we interact with each other and the things that are expected, and our traditions, the things that we do that are, you know, not just the science, but that enable you to really get ahead and feel like you're part of the community. And I think some of those things are overlooked. And some of those things you have to learn, and you have to learn them in a way that they're not often presented as, oh, so here's a value or here's a norm. They're things that you learn by going to colloquia, by listening to talks and looking at how people interact, right? And those are the things that I want to point out that I learned sort of along my journey. So after high school, as I said, felt very confident in high school. And so ended up going to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology as an undergraduate, where I had a really difficult time. I was really sort of a fish out of water there. I came in very confident, but as you can imagine, I was there with a lot of people who were extremely confident and had gone to like really top level schools, and who had parents who were, you know, who had gone to college. And neither of my parents went to college sort of in a regular way. And so I really didn't know how to do college. And it took me a while to really figure this out. I would say that my freshman year was pass-fail when I was there, and I did just fine freshman year. And so I was particularly confident. But going into sophomore year, I got some extremely bad advice. It turned out I was taking like too many classes, and I didn't know it. I thought, you know, hey, I want to be a physicist, I think, but maybe I should keep my options open and take some computer science classes. So I was taking core physics and core computer science classes, and it was way too much, and nobody stopped me from doing it. I often point out that my the blow-off class that I took that year was Japanese. Now, how anybody thought that I could handle all of those classes and Japanese? I don't know how that could, somebody could not even question me about, do you really know what you're doing? So I was really fortunate to, and I will say before that, after that first semester of sophomore year, I was on academic probation, which was actually a blessing in disguise because they required me to take fewer classes. And also I was able to identify some classes that, you know, I decided I was only going to take classes that I really wanted to. I wasn't going to worry about what the major was. I was going to take the classes that were of interest to me. And I took an observing class with Professor Jim Elliott. And meeting Jim was really the salvation for my undergraduate career, because Jim had actually been an undergraduate at MIT. He knew what it was like to be there. He was a very thoughtful person, and he really sat me down and went through the classes I was taking and said, okay, here's what I want you to do. All these classes you're taking, you've got a decently heavy load. I want you to think now at the start of the year about when things get rough, which class are you going to drop? And the advice was really important because in his explaining, look, you're going to put all of your effort into all of your classes because that's the kind of person you are. And it's going to be really hard to drop one because you're really invested. So I want you to think about which one is the one that is going to, you know, you're just going to say, this is too much and I'm going to drop it. And you're going to think about that now. So when it comes time, if you have to do that, you know what you're going to do. So that was really, really useful advice, and really a real opportunity to help me understand how to do college. So what I learned in that instance is that a good advisor really makes all the difference for how your how your career can go. And seeking out those good advisors, the ones who will tell you, look, I'm not saying you're going to fail, but I want you to think about what's going to happen in a particular circumstance. So really important. Once I graduated from undergraduate, Jim actually said, hey, you should go to graduate school. And I was like, no way, I have had enough school, I'm so done. And he was like, well, I really think you'd be great going to graduate school. And I said, well, maybe later, but I don't want to go now. And I don't know that he believed me because he was like, all right, if you're not going to come and you're not going to be a graduate student with me, then let's find you a job. So he actually knew that at the time the Hubble Space Telescope was being launched, and that they were looking for sort of data analysts and other folks to do different kinds of staffing, people who are post-bachelor degree, not necessarily PhD folks. So he said, let's find you a job. So I became a data assistant and outreach officer at the Goddard Space Flight Center, working on the Goddard High Resolution spectrograph, which is one of the first instruments on the Hubble Space Telescope. And the interesting thing is that in that year where I had been on academic probation, I actually took a lot of writing classes and some visual arts classes, and it was actually those classes that got me this job, because they were looking for both a data assistant and somebody to do public outreach. And so that actually strengthened my application, so that even though I had actually applied to Space Telescope, they fed my folks who were working for the Goddard High Resolution spectrograph, saw that application and were like, oh, this is great. We can hire this person and have both of these areas, the science and the outreach, covered. So I really enjoyed doing outreach. I found out that I really liked giving back to my community, and I really got to know astronomers and understand some of the values and some of the norms as in that position. So that was really useful to me. Once Hubble was launched, you may or may not remember, it had these problems with its optics. And in fact, these optics problems were the reason why I thought, maybe it's time for me to think about going back to graduate school, because I don't know what's going to happen and I don't know if I'm going to have a job. So in fact, people liked me. I had a lot of, folks in the community who could write me letters of recommendations. So it was actually because of the difficulties with Hubble that I decided to go back to graduate school, and I went to the University of Washington. And it was at University of Washington that I really learned the importance of your peer networks. So one great thing about at the time, the University of Washington, was that all of the students there were really pulling for each other, really supporting each other, really making sure that we all made it through. And I really enjoyed my time there. I'm friends with a lot of folks from there. But what stands out to me was that one graduate student and his wife, at some point, they were, they had a child, and because they were both students, they had a hard time taking care of the child. And there was one time during the week where they both had classes, and they came to the graduate students and said, hey, it's during lunch and we'll buy you lunch if somebody can watch our daughter for, an hour and a half. And everybody signed up. Everybody took shifts. We all helped each other out to make sure that it was covered. And it just, reflecting back on it, it wasn't even an issue. Everybody was really happy to do it. It was fun. It was really supportive of our whole community. The other thing I'll just mention, we had a qualifier, and you were expected to pass our qualifier after 2 tries. It's just the way it was set up. And a few people, including me, had to do it on the 3rd try. I didn't pass the first 2 times. But, and after I didn't pass that 2nd time, I was pretty mortified. I was pretty upset. And another person in the department, he came to me. It was sort of after hours. I was there kind of late, and he came in and he said, look, don't worry about it. I had no idea. He's like, I had to take it a 3rd time. You're gonna pass. You're gonna do just fine. Don't worry about it. And here's a mixtape of 80s music, because you know that you like 80s music. So it was really extremely supportive. I hadn't seen it coming. I hadn't expected it. We were just all very supportive of each other. And so I can't stress to you enough how important it is to have those peer groups. The other thing I have here is that I don't recommend having a remote advisor when it came time for me to find an advisor. Chris Impey was actually was visiting faculty from the University of Washington, and I really liked him, and I really liked TAing for him and decided to work with him. But eventually he went back because he was just visiting, and I decided to do my thesis with him. And while he was a great thesis advisor, it was really difficult to have a thesis advisor who was remote. And also I didn't know that he thought highly of me, because we only would talk about these, like, we would only really talk when we were talking about the sciences, and we didn't really build a relationship, sort of as colleagues. And so it wasn't actually until I came here to Tucson that I realized, like, how much he thought of me at the time. So, having a remote advisor has its disadvantages. I'm gonna move on now to the next. Yeah. So after I graduated, I actually got a postdoc at Stony Brook. And there, I was only there for a year because I applied for a NSF Astronomy and Astrophysics postdoctoral fellowship to go to Cerro Tololo. And part of the reason I did that was, well, in part because it was a great fellowship to have, and it allowed you to be pretty independent, think about, what kind of work you wanted to do, and it allowed you to go anywhere. And at the time, my boyfriend, now husband, was in Chile, and so this allowed me to have to go down to Chile and work where he was. But what I found was that, and this fellowship really has, it has a science part, but it also, the main point of it was that it had an outreach part, and this fellowship came about as a direct result of one of the decadal surveys, where sort of reaching out to the public was actually part of what the decadal survey thought that that astronomers should do. So I had a very strong case, and this picture over here shows my Astro Chile project, which was to have teachers in Tucson actually working with teachers in La Serena over video, and this is before Zoom, but over video, really doing projects and bringing information on teaching students between Chile and Arizona. And so, in fact, these were done, these discussions were done in Spanish and English, sort of mixed, mostly in Spanish. But what happened was that because I had this reputation as being someone who was interested in outreach and doing outreach, and again, I really love doing outreach, I found that in my science, people were putting me into this box of, oh, well, she's the outreach person, and they were not really respecting my interests and my abilities as a scientist. So I think it's really important to really, when you see that happening, kind of arrest it. If that's not what you want to do. It's really important to make sure that people are seeing you as the scientist that you are. And I will say that for me, what happened was I stopped doing outreach for a while in my career. I just was like, you know what? I'm not going to do it anymore because that's the only way people are seeing me. Unfortunate, but I've come back around to doing more outreach in my later years. After Chile, and I actually got married while I was in Chile to my husband. I had a daughter. My daughter was born in Chile. And then we had these postdoc years where I finished out my my fellowship, and but we were still in Chile, so I had a job as a postdoc in Chile supporting instrumentation on the telescopes, and I really enjoyed user support. I really enjoyed helping other astronomers get their own get their data. But what I did learn was that you really had to be an advocate for yourself, right? I really had to, again, not be put into this box, advocate for myself, advocate for the fact that I wanted to be seen as a scientist first. And so when my husband moved up to, we decided that we were going to leave Chile. My husband actually got a job up in the north because it's the same it was the same institution, but we moved from Chile up to Arizona. And so they weren't going to give me a job down in Chile. And so my husband basically said, look, if my wife can't have a job, then I'm not staying here. And people told me actually that there were people in the organization who were like, well, she doesn't need a job because her husband has a job. This is back a while ago, but those were the kinds of things that people were saying. But my husband was like, I'm not staying if my wife can't get a job here. So we moved. So he got a job, and then I was given a position as a postdoc here in Tucson. And one thing that again, I learned was that I had to advocate for myself. And so when I was asked actually as a postdoc to become the diversity advocate for NOAO, I said, well, I'm not going to take that position unless you give me a job, because being a diversity advocate at the time, that's nice. And it's a lot of work that I'm already doing and I'm already interested in, but that's not going to translate into a position at another institution. So I won't take that position unless I get a job as a full scientist, not just a postdoc. So I had to advocate for getting this assistant scientist position, and then I became the diversity advocate at NOAO. And again, I really liked helping other scientists do their science at least as much as I like doing my own science. In our organization, you move up through the ranks: assistant, associate, full. And so this next phase that I want to talk about is moving up as an associate scientist in the organization while I was still a diversity advocate. And what I realized was that I really felt like I was being kind of taken for granted again, that my science wasn't really being respected. And so I realized that this culture of astronomy is not really working for everyone. And in fact, it was not working for me. And one thing that I was really thinking about leaving the field. But then I went to a meeting actually in DC, and I was asked to give a talk at Howard. And what happened at Howard was that folks told me, somebody asked me if I wanted to become a faculty fellow at Howard and have do a sabbatical. And so what I learned at Howard was actually that the system was not working for a lot of people, and that it was really hard for folks at places like Howard to be involved in the broader areas of science. So here's a picture actually of Howard University, just the quad there. And it wasn't working for everyone. And so that propelled me into thinking about how we can make science work for more folks than just the folks who are at R1s, that there are folks who don't have the resources currently to think of themselves as being involved in large projects like the Rubin Observatory, or because they have these large teaching loads, because they're really sort of mentoring and taking care of their students, but they haven't been able to really tap into some of these larger projects. And so as the deputy director of our community science and data center, I've really taken on this idea of trying to change the culture, evolve the culture to where it really is benefiting more of the folks who are at smaller and underserved institutions. And so what I've learned is that you really have to be engaged, and I'm engaged in a few ways, but one of them is this book that I wrote with my postdoc, and my postdoc who is a social scientist, to really capture some of the things that we're doing already in the field and some of the things that we need to do, really centering the stories of people like me who noticed that the culture was not working for them and the ways in which they've seen that we need to expand and evolve the culture. And now I've been elected the 50th president of the American Astronomical Society. And we are celebrating our 125th year. I'm also the first Black president of the society, and so I'm still learning about what my takeaways are from this position. I wanted to just quickly say some of the keys to my success have been the strong Black women in my life. This is my mom and my great-grandmother, who actually passed away when I was in graduate school, and my grandmother, and there's me and my sister. But all of their strength has really gone into me, like my learning and my understanding and being comfortable in my own skin. Supporting a larger community has really been important to me. This is one of the astro networking dinners at the National Society of Black Physicists meeting. We had like 4 tables. This is just the table I happen to be sitting at, and really helping other people to take advantage of some of the work that needs to be done and doing their own work in the field. And I've really been sports teams have always been really important to me, and I think learning to be part of a team has really come from being on some of these sports teams and learning how to work with people. So I played rugby. I love this picture because I look really fierce, and I also rode crew for 4 years at MIT. And of course, my family has always been very supportive. So this is my husband, my son Emil, my daughter Tira. Of course, they're tiny in this picture, and this is a picture of them in Oslo. My husband's Norwegian, so this is us in Oslo just a couple of years ago. My daughter's now in college, and my son's in 8th grade. And so I've talked to you about a lot of things. But here are some of the things that you can ask me about, some of the things that have happened to me along my path that I'd be happy to discuss. And I'll take any questions if there's some time.
That was phenomenal there. Ah, my God. I have lots of questions, but I'm going to let other people start.
I can't see anybody, so let me know if there are.
Okay, I'm going to shoot some question while Nick and Sanlin organize other ones. I was curious a lot about a lot of stuff, but you said that you went to Howard and that you realized the faculty, the challenges that they were having. So can you elaborate which challenges and what do you mean by that? It's yeah, I had something in mind, but I was not sure. I wanted to hear from you.
It was really interesting. So when I went to Howard, I had this idea. I'm like, oh, well, I'm on sabbatical, so I'm gonna like have students work with me, and I'll have all this time to like work with my students, and I'll bring over some, at the time, DECAM had just come online. I had this like project to do with DECAM. DECAM images are 1 gigabyte each, right? And what I realized was that I wasn't bringing them across the internet because, for one thing, like Howard's internet would go down like every day around 3 o'clock. It would get super slow, right? And so I realized, like, oh my goodness, there are resource limitations at the school. Also, being at NOIRLab, I was used to having, IT folks, and I'd say, hey, my computer's not working, or I want this software, and can you help me like get it on and all working? And of course, there's none of that at Howard. It's like, oh yeah, you have to get it on yourself. You have to like make sure that even the school will let you get that software on. This is why things like science platforms are so important now for doing data analysis with large data sets, because the software can already be run at an institution like NOIRLab, right?
Yeah.
And so all of these kind of resource issues became much more apparent to me when I actually took myself out of, the sort of privileged place where I was working. And I hadn't realized that at all.
I moved a lot. I as well, and I can relate to that, to having, yeah, you're used to, and I was like, how do you do that? Right.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I can ask another one.
There aren't any, so I'm going to encourage people to either like raise your electronic hand or put a question in chat. There aren't any right now, so you can ask
Okay, I
yourself.
will ask one more, and Nick and Sanin, please jump on. The other one close to my heart that you touched that I was interested is being an outsider. And I also say I'm also an outsider in so many ways, intersections, but I always see it as a huge advantage.
Yes.
But I wanted to hear from you in terms of doing your science or communicating in general, being outsider, which tools you gain from that. And yeah.
Yeah. So I think that the advantage of feeling like an outsider is that you're not wedded to the system as it is. And what you
Right.
recognize again is how things are not working for everybody and the points where things are not working for everybody. So as an example, this going to Howard like and realizing, oh yeah, this it totally makes sense why people wouldn't be engaged. So when I came back, I actually reached out to friends who are at smaller institutions and said, what is keeping you from being engaged in these big projects? You know, the things that are decadal survey types of projects like Rubin or Hubble, like, and the things that they told me were things like networking. It's hard for people at small institutions to network with people at bigger institutions. It's not clear that why anybody would reach out from a big insider institution to collaborate with you. It's hard to identify uh, technology and resources are moving really quickly, and there's if you don't have access to them or you don't know about them or you haven't been trained in like the best ways to use them, especially coming from my generation, like just the way our science has evolved, right, is very new. And I'm not that old. I mean, I'm old, but I'm not that old. So just if you haven't been engulfed in that new way of doing science, right, then some of the new technologies, the new ways of doing things, AI is going to be a new way of doing things, right? If you haven't had the opportunity to be trained on those things, then that's a barrier, and it's a barrier for both the professor, but then that's a barrier for your students too, right? So like being an outsider, I think just being able to recognize where these barriers are and what's keeping people from doing things, and then going out and asking people. That was the other thing I noticed, was that even though I'm at an observatory that is supposed to be supporting all of the astronomy, and I heard this from other people, not just my observatory, but we rarely ask people at small institutions, what do you need? We assemble these panels of people who can afford to take time out of their day to be on panels, and we ask them like what are the things, but we don't ask the people at the smaller institutions, well, what do you need? And I realized that like that was happening a lot, and it was happening in multiple other places as well.
That's fantastic. I have other questions, but I see that Heather and Alfonso have questions. I don't want to dominate. Heather, you want to ask your question? Heather is a member of our Shield, very involved in outreach as well. Heather has many Heathers.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm interested in what kind of ways do you go about establishing common ground with colleagues? And if you have any advice for networking, like, do you use things from like your personal life, like your hobbies, to form a common ground?
Yeah. I do it in different ways depending on the situation, right? I mean, you maybe don't. I actually am not a particularly social person. I know that seems crazy, but it's true. And so but in my work, right, as community science and data center, deputy director, I really have to I have to be in a position to ask people as opposed to bringing people in. I have to be sort of the person even kind of pushing the networking. And so, in that sense, in that way, right, I'm really counting on my job as what I do to be the person who's creating opportunities for networking. And I'm still trying to create opportunities for networking, especially with folks at smaller institutions. Sometimes, I mean, one thing that is very striking to me is that you need incentives, like not just do people need incentives to network and to be part of a community. And I say that because people at large institutions think that, oh, well, if I just ask somebody at a small institution, of course they'll kind of want to work with me. But that's not necessarily the case. It could be that, like, look, that's just a lot of work to be involved in. The person wants to feel like you need them, not like you're doing them a favor, right? So I think it's really important, like, to think about what other people's incentives are to come and work with you, and why are you asking them to work with you, right? Not necessarily just having this like idea that, oh, well, I'm doing all this great stuff, so of course they want to work with me. Like, maybe that's just not like in what they can do right now.
So one thing I was worried about is that if people think that they're different than what most of the people look like in the field, really our field is international. So there are many ways we're all different from one another, but there are also a wide variety of ways in which we are very similar.
Sure.
And so sometimes I'll talk about music as like a way to relate to somebody, even though I look very different from them. like I find that something different than work can actually help you find a common ground.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely, that's the case. I think that I definitely think that finding common ground is extremely important. I mean, and we do that through our work, but we also, as you say, can do that through our interests, our broader interests. And like I said, I think it's really important that I, was interested in sports. I do a lot of sports. My kids do a lot of sports. I argue endlessly with my son about the best basketball players and all of that, and I'm happy to argue with other people too. So, so all of it, I think, can bring you closer to other people and to networking. Thanks for the question.
All right, thank you.
We have another 3 minutes only. So Alfonso, you want to ask your question?
Yeah. Hi, Dara. That was a great talk. Actually, I saw a lot, well, at least several parallels, being the only Black in places, and then, doing pretty well in high school, and then, in my case, going to Caltech and getting slammed and all that.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I saw this with your 2009. So at the White House, what was that all about?
So I got asked by by a colleague here. He was invited actually to bring one person with himself to the White House Star Party when Obama was president. And so here's me actually at that Star Party. It was very exciting. I got to meet Sally Ride. I got to meet Mae Jameson. I got to meet the Obamas actually. Here's them trying to look with like bright lights shining on them at an object in the sky. You can tell they can't see a thing, but they're trying to be diplomatic about it. And in fact, Barack is coming over to tell Michelle you can't actually see anything. And so here's during the day, here's me, and here's me. I want to point out my scarf here because this is the only picture I have of me with the president and his family. And this is my colleague here. And you know what he's not doing? He's not taking a picture of me with the president of the United States, showing him Jupiter through a telescope. So, but I had a great time, and it was really, I thought it was spectacular that Obama thought enough about science to have that star party at the White House. And I think they had one more the next year. That was a little more political, a little more, you know, important people showing up because they weren't at the first one.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have one last question in the last minute. In terms of what happened to you in moments, you know, yeah, you said you were in certain areas, there were not a lot of Black students around you, and you're feeling alone in a way, right? And
Mhm.
there's not enough critical mass for you not to feel, right? And so just thinking about people that are outsiders in general in so many different intersections, not just African Americans, but any, right?
Yeah.
Where did you get your strength? Where did you get you talked about your grandmother, you have all these amazing women behind you,
Yeah.
but if this is a case that you call them back home and you said, you know, just go back there, or
Yeah, I actually think that more for me, it was more peer support.
mm,
So especially say at the University of Washington, I had when I was in graduate school, there were a couple of other women who I knew who were in other departments in biology and genetics, actually, that we would get together regularly and chat. And it was really
nice.
interesting because they were in a completely different department from me, but we were having some of the same issues. Actually, one of them had a way worse time in her department than I had. But you know, finding common ground with various members of my peer group, and again, my peer group both in the department but also outside of the department, and looking for other places, other outlets. I also played Frisbee in graduate school, right? And so I had a group of friends who were, you know, the Frisbee friends, or a group of friends who were, you know, people I had known from the East Coast who were not astronomers. And so I really think having this like larger network of people who are, you know, either going through some things that you are going through or who you can talk to about it is
No,
really important.
I think it's critical. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with you. Thank you so much, Dara. That was
Thank
amazing.
you.
And I'm sure other people will watch it. Also, we will put it on the web, and it will be super inspirational. So thank you so much. It was great.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for having me, and thanks for coming.
Thank you for sharing your story. It was fantastic. Okay, bye.